Coming up on Network Africa. Eyewitnesses in Sudan say army plane shot down during clashes in Khartoum. Somali forces take over areas vacated by African Union troops. Plus, all eyes on South Sudan as the country plans to hold its first long-delayed election since independence. Hello everyone, I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. We begin in Sudan, where doctors say there's a life-threatening shortage of chemotherapy for children because months of fighting between the country's two rival generals has destroyed many health facilities. Only one specialist oncology center remains located at Al-Zara Hospital in the Sudanese city of Wad Medani. According to medic Migani Tilal, the hospital already used up about 80% of their chemotherapy supplies because they're having to treat patients coming in from all over the country. According to statistics from the Sudan Medical Council, 59 of the 89 hospitals in the capital area, Khartoum, have completely suspended services, and the remaining 30 are fully or partially operating, but a considerable number of them can only provide emergency services. Well, in the meantime, we're learning that a fighter jet was shot down in Khartoum, where clashes and artillery fire targeted several neighborhoods in Sudan's war-torn capital. An eyewitness in northern Khartoum said, quote, "We saw pilots parachuting as the plane dove towards the ground." Other witnesses said that they observed airstrikes near the state television building, which the RSF launched an attack on this week and used anti-aircraft missiles. According to a statement, a source within the paramilitary rapid support forces said that the RSF had shot down the army plane, adding that they had arrested the pilot after he landed, also accusing the Sudanese army of heinous massacres in the Khartoum region. According to the United Nations, the conflict has killed nearly 3,000 people and displaced 2.8 million. Well, security expert David Otto joins me now for more. Hello, David.
Hi, Joke. Thank you.
Right, so this conflict has dragged on for over 2 months. What's your assessment of this whole situation as we speak?
Well, it's quite concerning. As you rightly said, the conflict has dragged on since April 15th. And there are no signs that, there will be any, kind of halt to the halt in terms of hostilities between the RSF, that's the Rapid Support Forces, and the Sudanese Armed Forces. What we see on ground is that both sides, are still struggling to consolidate power. They are making sure that they do have control of key critical power infrastructures. The situation is quite dire. We're not just talking about the number of displacements that have occurred, people that have left Sudan to countries like Chad, Egypt, Ethiopia. We're talking about the level of human rights abuse. People have been, raped, women, young girls. There has been a shortage of medical supplies, halting of normal activities. And we still do not have a solution. All the ceasefires that both sides have agreed upon before, either by the US or the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia, or even regional parties like IGAD or the African Union, all the ceasefire has failed. And, we continue to see more fighting between the RSF and the Sudanese armed forces. So it's at a stalemate, I have to say, and very concerning because, of course, Sudan is placed in a very strategic position in the continent.
And there are also reports, David, that, the Sudanese army are heavily outnumbered on the streets of Khartoum, despite their large numbers, really, almost 200,000 of them. Who is in the country of the city right now, or the center of the city at this point?
Well, one of the key elements of this war has been high level of propaganda, disinformation, misinformation. While the RSF would say that they have control, the Sudanese armed forces would deny. So it's difficult to actually ascertain as to who has much of the power control. But the RSF is claiming that it does have control of many of the military and security infrastructures. But the Sudanese armed forces, as you know, they have a very much powerful leverage because they do control the aerial surface. You did talk about a jet being shot down, and this possibly would be a jet belonging to the Sudanese armed forces. So they have that leverage in terms of air power. What the RSF does have is that they have a lot of firepower on the ground. They do have a lot of the former armed groups, from Darfur and other areas within Sudan, join their ranks. So there is some kind of a case to make that they do have more men on the ground. But in terms of power control, both sides are still, fighting to grab as much power as possible. And that's one of the reasons why we still have not arrived at any ceasefire yet, because, none of the sides is convinced that it has enough power to leverage in terms of negotiation.
Right, and there are also reports of fighter jets being shot down. Do the warring sides have access to these sophisticated military equipment, or do you believe that they are being armed by a third party?
I think it's both. The Sudanese armed forces are legitimate forces of the Sudanese government. Of course, the RSF was incorporated in 2013. That also makes it a legitimate force. So what we see now is that the Sudanese army has been able to kind of isolate itself from retaining some of those, firepower using, the air power, the jets that you see, while the RSF on the other side has been able to retain more men on ground. So in terms of power supply, this is one thing which is quite important because war is all about logistics, and who controls the logistics, will control the war. There are concerns that, for example, people talk about the Libyan National Army of, General Haftar, supporting the RSF forces. People also talk about countries like Egypt, being on the side of the Sudanese armed forces. But again, these are all allegations that, it's very difficult to determine. But be quite sure that war requires a lot of ammunition and arms, and resupply. And because these men continue to have them, there is a strong argument to make that, they do have not just internal support, but they possibly have people that are supporting them, or perhaps even countries that are supporting them from outside. But we are not quite sure yet, who is actually supporting who in this war.
Right, and David, while we do know that the war is between the Sudanese army and the RSF, there have been a lot of people trying to, get the two sides to sheathe their swords, and a lot of ceasefires. There are several attempts at ceasefires which have broken down. How would you describe Western allies or neighboring African countries' role in this crisis?
Well, I think, I would have been much more expectant to see the African Union playing a very critical role. But of course, the African Union had kind of given room for the IGAD, which is the intergovernmental regional body. And, the African Union was expecting that IGAD would play a very critical role. Sudan tried in the beginning, but of course, South Sudan tried in the beginning, but of course it did fail. We have seen a lot of interest, coming from countries like Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. The US has been involved. But, I think the truth has been that there has been an overfocus, on trying to resolve some of the symptoms of the conflict. For example, talking about giving access to humanitarian, people that want humanitarian passage, to flee away from Sudan. Literally, what that has done is, in some aspect, it has given the RSF and the Sudanese armed forces the notion that nobody really wants to resolve the underlying causes. People are much more concerned about giving them more space to fight, and that's why we see allegations of RSF occupying buildings that people have, flown, flee away from the country. So I think, the resolution has been quite poor. what I want to see in terms of resolution, I want to see a situation where both men are reconciled, to the days when they could agree to overthrow the former dictator al-Bashir. This is where I think the focus should be on reconcile both the RSF and the Sudanese armed forces, so that they can share equitable power and then return the country back to a democratic process. This is what I expect the African Union and regional parties, or perhaps the international governmental organizations, to do.
And right, those organizations that you talk about, many do wonder, if they're also thinking along the line that after all this time and after failed talks and negotiations, what would it take for the two warring generals to come together to negotiate and bring an end to this bad blood?
I think it's quite simple. Both the RSF and the leadership of the RSF and the Sudanese armed forces, they've got to understand that none of them has the power and capability, irrespective of the kind of support that they get within Sudan and out of Sudan. None of them will have the capacity to win this war in the battlefield. So what I expect to see is, some kind of a negotiation that allows, both men to share power, especially when it comes to integrating the rapid support forces. A lot of these armed groups that are now supporting the rapid support forces believe that they do have a chance, to leverage, their position when it comes to a negotiation, and therefore they will keep fighting. But the RSF cannot win because it doesn't have the air power. It doesn't have the legitimacy. I mean, of course, both of them, none of them has the legitimacy because, of course, they are beneficiaries of a coup d'etat. But what we're looking at right now is a situation where we need to see both men agree to an equitable share of power in terms of how they can leverage on these armed groups, joining the Sudanese armed forces. That is what we need. Unless we have that, we'll see a situation where those who were, brought in to protect the country would tend to be the destroyers of the country.
Right. Security expert David Otto, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Elsewhere, Somali forces have assumed security responsibilities in 5 of the 6 sectors where African Union troops have been deployed. The Defense Ministry said in a statement that it appreciated the sacrifices made over the years by the African Union mission and the countries which had contributed soldiers such as Burundi, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya and Uganda. The statement comes after the scheduled withdrawal of 2,000 AU troops expected to have left by the end of June. Most of the military bases so far handed over are located in the lower Shabelle region and were operated by the Burundian contingent of the mission. Another 3,000 AU soldiers are expected to leave by the end of September, with the entire force due to be out of Somalia by the close of 2024. Welcome back. Now, the video you're about to watch contains graphic content and viewers' discretion is advised.
Oh my gosh. Honey, look what's happening here.
This video showing armed plainclothes officers dragging a man from a car and stomping on him until he lay motionless has outraged South Africans and drawn more attention to the country's problem with police brutality. The officers are part of the security team protecting South Africa Deputy President Paul Mshatile. Mr. Mshatile's office said in a statement that the incident happened in Johannesburg and added that they detests any unnecessary use of force, particularly against unarmed civilians. The 45-second video, which was posted on Twitter, was recorded by a person in another car not involved in the incident. The video shows the officers, some holding rifles, dragging the man across the road and brutalizing him until he was unconscious and lay motionless on his back. The officers were also seen kicking another man who holds his hands over his head to protect himself. The police protection unit, known in South Africa as the Blue Light Brigade, has a reputation of using unnecessary force on people.
Is this I'm going to raise up? He's fainted.
Let's get more on this terrible, horrific situation. Our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty de Vere, joins me now for more. Hello, Betty.
Hello, Jackie.
Right, so what more can you tell us about this incident? We understand that 4 officers have already been charged, although reports say at least 7 officers were involved in the incident.
Well, there are 4 in particular who have now been served suspension letters, and the charges by the police watchdog, that's the IPID, Independent Police Investigative Directorate, who are investigating the incident to see if there was any breach or if there was any threat to the life of their principal, that's the Deputy President, Paul Mashatile, who has had a number of activities. This happened in Johannesburg, by the way, at an area called Four Ways by the highway. He's had a couple of engagements within the Gauteng province, community events and all that. So this, we understand, happened on Sunday. And he wasn't present here. He may have driven past, but according to, we don't have a clear detail of what even led to this. But one account from the Defense Union, among whom one of the men assaulted there, the 3 men were assaulted. One of them, we understand, is a member of the Defense Union, is said to have told them that they were driving down and then one SUV pulled up close to them, another one, and then another one. They were, the men in the SUVs had a gun, and then they came out, pulled out some of the people in.
Right, Betty, I'm not, if you can hear me, I think I must have lost your audio. But they are said to be the pets of the VP security detail, as you have rightly confirmed, inflicting harm on 2 men. Do we know who these assault victims are or the reason behind the policemen hitting them?
Okay. Lord, come on!
Okay, we'll get back to Betty on that situation. I think we've lost some audio contact with her. Well, over in South Sudan, President Salva Kiir has said that the country's long-delayed elections will be held next year as planned. President Kiir said he would run for re-election in the polls, the first since the country gained independence. No other candidate has declared their candidacy, but first Vice President Riek Machar is also expected to run. Mr. Kiir has been president since independence in 2011 after a long-running civil war, but conflict continued even after independence. The civil war broke out in 2013 when the president fell out with Mr. Machar. A power-sharing agreement was signed between the warring parties in August 2018 in a bid to bring the 5-year civil war to an end. Rights group Amnesty International has accused security forces, separatists and ethnic militia of committing rampant atrocities in Cameroon's English-speaking heartland. Amnesty details rampant human rights violations and other crimes, including executions, torture and rape in the northwest region. It says people have been caught in the crossfire as multiple fighters clash in the region, with individuals who speak out on the atrocities being threatened and arbitrarily detained. The rights group has also expressed deep concerns over the failure of the authorities to cooperate effectively with international and regional human rights institutions. Cameroon has been plagued by fighting since English-speaking separatists launched a rebellion in 2017. The conflict has claimed more than 6,000 lives and placed more than 1 million people, forced them to flee their homes. And to bilateral relations, Egypt and Turkey have announced that they have appointed ambassadors to each other's countries for the first time in a decade, the latest sign of a warming of diplomatic relations. The foreign ministry in Cairo and Ankara reported improved diplomatic relations between the 2 countries at ambassadorial level, adding that Egyptian El Hamani had been appointed in Ankara and Turkish Salih Mutlu in Cairo. According to two separate press releases from both countries, the measure reflects the mutual desire to develop bilateral relations, adding that the appointments mark a reapproachment between the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Although relations have been long strained, trade has continued between the two countries. In 2022, Turkey was the leading importer of Egyptian products worth a total of $4 billion. Right, so we've not been able to re-establish contact with Betty. We'll have to take up that discussion another day. So let's end the show with this report. Salsa is not a popular dance in Nigeria, but 35-year-old street photographer and dancer Emeka Adindu is trying to change the narrative by using salsa to spread happiness to those he can. In a bid to fight mental health stigma, he says at least 40 people attend his dance class every week using salsa to contribute to a positive mood for themselves. Take a listen.
In Nigeria's capital city, Abuja, men and women gathered under a canopy, stepping in tunes to Afro-Caribbean sound, salsa. The group is led by Emeka Adindu, a street photographer and dancer who says salsa saved his life. Growing up in a country with deep-rooted stigma against mental health issues, Adindu found solace in the popular Latin dance as he battled abuse, depression, and suicidal thoughts.
Salsa was the only thing that could make me smile. All those days I was battling, fighting with my demons, with my past, with my everything. Salsa was the only thing that makes me feel like living. The most interesting thing about living on earth was salsa, because it's a couple dance. And when you dance with someone, there's no space for you to think about your sorrow, because one, you're thinking about the music, you're thinking about the counts, the rhythm. I got happiness, love through dance and salsa. With everything I've passed through in my life, I've seen a lot. But I'm gonna give it out to the world. This will be my sacrifice, this will be my gift to the world by giving out love and expressing happiness.
He now helps others do the same with free dance classes in the capital city, Abuja, which he started in 2007. The free salsa class is for anyone going through trauma or just for people who want to unwind or relieve work stress every weekend. At one of Adindu's sessions, an entrepreneur, Princess Solomon, unwound by swinging and tapping her feet to the peppy music.
It has helped me relieve stress. It has helped me build relationship between people. I've made new friends, and the dance keeps me fit.
And not too far from her, massage therapist M.M. Anderson says she sees it as an escape therapy to ease off. She found out about the class online and has been attending for over a year now.
The intention was it was like my personal social activity. And it's helped me distract myself from a lot of stress and ease myself.
Meanwhile, medical professionals say the stigma associated with mental health in Nigeria's culturally conservative society makes matters worse, attributing mental health issues with spiritual problems.
It is not a spiritual problem, it is a health problem. You know, people always easily identify physical health. Okay, I have malaria, I have diabetes, hypertension. I think it's normal, but then when it comes to their brain being ill, they start trying to find another way to explain it away, instead of knowing that it is one more illness that is can occur from my body malfunctioning, in this case, the brain.
But Nancy Ojinta and other mental health advocates have a tough job to fully and positively change perceptions about mental health in Africa's most populous country. It is still a largely taboo subject in Nigeria, and most people would depend on self-help instead of seeking for professional assistance. A 2021 UNICEF report shows 1 in 6 Nigerians aged between 15 and 24 are depressed, anxious, or have other mental health issues.
Well, that's the program today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joker Rogers. Bye for now.